fundamentally believe people are good. That has to be the basic premise. People are good, or the alternative is they are bad. We want to say that anything to do with the behavior, anything to do with the person, is a symptom of the system or the situation, and is never a root cause. It is never a stopping point, because people are fundamentally good. They make mistakes all the time. People do things that are poor decisions all the time. People do things that are quote-unquote bad, but they have retribution, they make amends, so fundamentally they're still good. All those things become powerful mechanisms in a system that has gone awry to have the people who are trying to do problem solving stop when they encounter something that looks like a root cause. None of those things I just described are root causes. The only time a person or a behavior becomes a root cause, and it's a stopping point in an analysis, is if you are willing to have that person put in prison. And it's literally that distinct. If you're talking somebody does something in an organization, the question is, would you put that person in prison for that? And if the answer is no, then it is not an endpoint if you're really trying to do problem solving. That doesn't mean coming up with the root cause as an ends. That is a means. So we go through a cause analysis. This caused this, one thing caused another, until you come down to what the root cause is, which is a plurality. We'll get to that in a little bit. But that is not the purpose of what we're doing the problem solving for. The problem solving is to find solutions. But our goal is not to find the root cause. That is just the second step in problem solving. This is what we're trying to do. If we're trying to do the blame game, we can stop, halfway down the path here and just say this person didn't do something, or they stole the $10 or what have you, and we can stop and we think we've done something, but we have done nothing to solve the problem. All of this is not negativity. It's not being analysis for analysis' sake. It's because we're looking at a balanced world, a holistic solution, and we're really looking at a win-win for everything, everybody involved. It's a world view. So we have to have that fundamental belief that people are good. The only scenario that we can stop the causal analysis and we can stop prematurely, so to speak, with a person is that prison scenario. Did the person commit espionage, for example? And are you willing to actually go in and have a trial and send the person to prison? If the answer is yes, and it probably is in that scenario, then that's fine. We can stop it. Now let me dwell on that last point a little bit more, because I think it's very important to realize why we are not including the bad or evil scenario in ordinary problem solving. It becomes a means to distract us from good, ordinary, well-intentioned problem solving if we let that enter into the equation. And here's why. If we are willing to say that we're going to stop with a behavior, or willing to say that it's because somebody did something, but we're not willing to have a value judgment on that, we're just willing to act as if that in itself was a root cause. In other words, the person didn't follow a procedure, or they did something they weren't supposed to do. If that is self-evident of why the problem happened, that is absurd, because a behavior, no matter how egregious, is always symptomatic of something else that's going on. It doesn't even matter. It's not a value judgment here. Remember, this is problem solving, and we're trying to find solutions. And even if the behavior is completely out of bounds and is not acceptable, and we're not going to endorse that behavior, so what? It's still a symptomatic of something in the system that enabled it to happen or allowed it to happen, and that's not going to ever get revealed if we stop with the premise that the behavior is responsible. So the way you disarm that is, if someone starts doing that, you have to ask them, are you willing to send the person to prison for that behavior? I would hope they would say, no. Someone following a procedure doesn't deserve to go to prison. So that means you gotta keep going. And unless they're willing to say that, then why on earth would you stop there? There's something else going on. Remember, the good versus bad is part of our problem-solving technique. It's not that the good people in the room get to define if this is a problem or not, and the bad people just have to go along with that. But that's essentially what happens when you have these kind of ad hominem or personality-driven problem-solving techniques. It's saying that, well, we're all equal, kind of like George Orwell. We're all equal. All animals are equal, but some are more equal than others. No, Either we're all equal, period, or we're not all equal, period. And those are the kinds of absolutes that we need to have in systems thinking. It sounds good to be able to say, well, that person just wasn't thinking right, or they didn't follow procedures, let's just move forward. That is a bullying behavior. It sounds like an enabling, powerful thing, but it's using personality to drive analysis or to prevent analysis. And we need to stop that in its tracks. Okay, so let's keep working on this and talking about the behaviors and how that the behaviors themselves become the mechanism to control the behaviors. And this gets to be a little bit through the looking glass here, so hang on there with me. We're going to talk about different types of bullying behavior. And a bully is just is pushing something through based on personality or intimidation, and being disingenuous about intentions. And probably more to the point is that there's a different goal in mind than what you think they have. So it's really important to understand the mechanisms that go on and the techniques that are used, because it becomes very, very convoluted quickly. But there's three types of bullies that we want to talk about in this discussion. The first is a workplace/playground. That one is your classic playground bully who just goes out and when the teacher's not around, pushes kids around, tries to get their way. Same thing around the workplace. It's someone who uses intimidation to get what they want. They get to maybe have the better shift. They get to have better working conditions or whatever. Maybe even just a better desk to somebody else, just because they're willing to intimidate people. But it tends to be just annoying. Certainly not something that should be tolerated. But it becomes somewhat isolated, and it's just kind of personality driven. The more serious one is the serial bully, and it takes place both in the workplace and the playground, but it's just a serial version of that, and that becomes more of a sinister, plotted pattern, and the key word here is pattern. The serial bully is an opportunist, a predator in a sense, and the last one is organization bullying, and this one's also a little creepy in the sense that nobody really knows what's going on, or nobody is quote-unquote responsible for it, but that is essentially a serial bully getting the organization to act on their behalf unwittingly. So the organization becomes, in a sense, the bully by believing premises that are simply not true. And then they become kind of the self-perpetuating thing that lives on its own. As ordinary people in ordinary life don't expect to be deceived. We expect things like this, but we don't expect it to be deceptive. Now, how do we say with a straight face as systems thinkers that we're going to be able to somehow sniff out deceptive behavior when we are working with the premise that everybody is fundamentally good? It's just not going to be in our ordinary mindset as we go around each day thinking, gee, everything that looks good and is good may fundamentally be bad, because it could be a Trojan horse, or it could have something deceptive in it. You can't go around being paranoid and living that way, but at the same time, that is the reality. How do you do that? Well, being so cynical. You do that by taking people out of the equation. That's how you do it. You work on the process. You work on documenting and looking at the way interactions occur. You look at the environment, the methods that we're using, the process, the procedures, the way we measure things. We look at the equipment, the machinery, the buildings, everything else, but not the individuals. We can look at roles, we can look at behaviors, but not individual people. If you watch House MD, notice that he goes to great lengths to not know his patients. And that's because he can best diagnose what's going on by looking at the facts, cold and hard, and not be tainted by people, because people are going to have an influence on that process of understanding root cause analysis, interactions, all those types of things, and it's going to taint our thinking. And humans can't be not influenced by other humans if we're going to look at root cause analysis for the purpose of really being genuine and sincere and looking for things that could actually change. The only way we can truly help ourselves and make the world better is by taking people out of the equation for purposes of analysis. But to me, it's really a very good, positive, sincere way of doing problem solving, because we're trying to really look for a good solution that fits everyone by not singling out anyone. A good way to do it is to do role play. You can get little characters here and just have the role that this is the person that does this, or this is, and just do it this way. With little action figures really works quite well, because again, you're looking to see how the interactions, how the circumstances all work together to make the situation that causes the problem that then lends to a solution or solutions that we can choose from. But anytime that there is something in here that is out of the ordinary, so if it's something where it's just a series of events, people are perhaps a little bit of alignment, and we need to adjust things, that's fine. You could use people's names. I don't think anybody's going to be too offended, and so on. But the stuff that's truly systems thinking worthy of problem solving, the stuff that is entrenched in organizations that gets worse, the stuff that systems thinking best breaks through, will have some type of Trojan horse going on. There's going to be some type of controlling behavior. There's going to be some type of sinister force, something deceptive, in other words, that we're not expecting to see. And that's what has to be rooted out of this. And the way that that works from a human psychology standpoint, because remember, systems thinking is all about different disciplines of life, and so psychology is a big factor in here. And the way you develop a Trojan horse and you make it so it becomes self-perpetuating in terms of a reinforcing loop to keep it well entrenched and hidden in the organization is to use kryptonite. And that's a term that I like to use for something that is our nemesis, our own internal nemesis. And we all have things, whether it be skeletons in the closet, psychological things, fears, what have you. They're all things there that are our kryptonite. They affect it's something that is personal enough to where it's going to become an artificial showstopper in any type of root cause analysis. So that is a great way for a Trojan horse to continue to be deceptive and entrenched and live on in its own hidden form, because people are not going to go beyond the kryptonite. So if you're doing a root cause analysis and you come across, this caused this, and then this caused this, and this caused this, and you come across something where there's a behavior, and they say, well, gee, that's not acceptable, so you're going to go to the next level, and you come across something that is kryptonite-like. In other words, the person is crazy, or perhaps something is uncomfortable to discuss because it's they were doing something that people just don't talk about, or there's something there that becomes a social taboo, in other words. And we stop because we think we're being kind by not going into that because it's personal business, which to a degree that is true, but the part that we don't understand is we've just been deceived. We have let this become a showstopper so that this is now our cause. This is what we think is causing the problem. And we stop our root analysis, and now we start developing solutions around this. Well, think about that. That is not kind. That is absurd, because now this is a Trojan horse in itself. Because I don't believe, unless this person's willing to go to prison, I don't believe that no matter what this kryptonite is, that it's evil. It's just something that is a social taboo, or something that is a construct that's going to take this person down. And it probably will, because if it's really kryptonite, it's something that you can't really get through. So it's a wicked problem at this point. What we call a wicked problem, that it just doesn't have a solution by ordinary means. But if we stop here, what we have now done is blamed this person, because we have made it personal. Going down this path, we've been working with people, and that's why we came across this kryptonite. Therefore, we have unknowingly blamed this person, and we are now going to develop solutions around blame, which will never work. Because one, we don't believe people are ever to blame, but number two, and more importantly, is we've taken off the table the real root cause that has an absolute ability to become a solution. This will not ever be an effective solution. This is going to be a band-aid at best, but most likely it's going to reinforce the very thing that caused the problem. Because remember, the kryptonite was placed there by deception, so we're going to stop short of finding out why that kryptonite was brought into the equation when it shouldn't have been, and Therefore, we're going to further entrench the behavior that started this chain of events that should have never been going down the kryptonite path to begin with, and therefore it's going to happen again and again and again. We have now started a perpetual motion that's independent of the serial bully, independent of the workplace bully, and is now an organization bully, because the organization has been taught that when you encounter this, you go back and you blame the kryptonite holder, and then you start building policy and problem-solving techniques and a culture around that very deceptive behavior. What happens if we have some people who are not going to be intimidated by kryptonite? We're going to say, I don't care if it's a personal problem. I don't care if it's embarrassing. I want to see what's going on here because I don't believe that that's the root cause. I want to keep going. So this is the kryptonite. We're going to go in and drive in to see what's going on beyond that. Sounds like good intentions, and is actually what we've been talking about all along, that we have to keep going and not stop at a behavior or a symptom. We have to look for true root causes, and that's great. But here's what happens if we're not careful, and if we don't apply systems thinking techniques to problem solving, if we use traditional linear thinking, what's going to happen is we now have to, because we're talking about people again, the only way to find out what that kryptonite is to deal with the person, not the role or the circumstances, but now we have to take the person as a human out of context, which is a violation of also systems thinking, and we're going to then essentially put them on trial to find out what this kryptonite is about. And it's never going to work for several reasons, and it gets convoluted here as well. But first of all, we've taken the person out of context. So the behavior and the kryptonite is meaningless by definition at that point, because as systems thinkers, it's about the combination of the environment, the interactions, the process, all these things come together, and it's that tapestry that forms behaviors and outcomes. So we're taking that and lifting it out of context and somehow going to examine it through a microscope and dissect it, and that's a violation right there. But where it absolutely won't work is that it is that person's kryptonite. So it's typically going to be something that they're not functional in, or that is going to be their own demise. The bully, when they pick on someone, they don't pick on the kid that has a nice haircut, stylish clothes, and a nice smile. They pick on something that is mean, something that is not going to go anywhere. We pick on something that's usually a psychological quality that's going to prevent them from ever talking about what it is that is being blocked. Get that into a value system, then we're going to get locked into that. And something is either deceptive or it's not. And if it's deceptive, we need to break through it. We need to find a way around it in terms of its power. If it is not deceptive, then it's not deceptive. But there's really no in between on some of these things. And I think if we don't understand that, then we need to dramatize the point so that we are not becoming our own nemesis. Our point here is not to be so aggressive in doing this root cause that when we encounter kryptonite, we need to just keep on going. I mean, that may be the conclusion that some people hear from what I'm saying, but that is bully behavior. That's controlling behavior in itself. So if we're doing that, the organization has become a bully if we try to go through that. If we stop and honor the kryptonite when we encounter it, then we become a bully because we're blaming the victim. You can't win. What we typically do is we act like this doesn't exist, and we somehow do this averaging, or we somehow do this compromise. I don't know how it all works. To me, it's so fundamentally weird that I don't understand it, but it's apparently the way the world works, because we stop here and we act like this is not kryptonite, but yet we treat it like it's kryptonite when it comes to not going through it, and we have all these social constructs and taboos and so on that end up in complete gridlock that we refuse to acknowledge as gridlock. We see that this is a self-perpetuating loop. There's no way out of this. This is a riddle. There is no solution to this riddle. You stay away from this. Systems thinkers need to sense this out way back here, looking for tipping points about to happen. This is starting to happen way back in the earlier stages where it can be identified and nipped in the bud before it gets going. So let's talk more about this dynamic of being able to do problem solving while at the same time being mindful of deceptive techniques and not letting those become our detour or take us off path, and that we nip those deceptive tendencies or tip-offs early up in the process of problem solving so that we don't get trapped down into one of those kryptonite type areas. So if we look at the target, which I believe is the word for someone who's a predator or is going to be trying to control others through bully behavior, the target becomes completely the center of attention and focused and trapped, because the bully, of course, is trying to control behavior, but the situation, the environment, and so on, for the reasons what we just went through, become also a bully in a sense. The organization itself often becomes the bully to re-entrench it, and then lastly, the person itself, the target. Assuming this is a person and not a role, because we're talking people now, because we let the people, this kryptonite effect also becomes. The bully can just take lunch, go away, and that's why, when it gets to be this point, the bully is no longer really of our interest, because the bully can just pack up their marbles and go home, and they can sit back and watch the hijinks ensue, because the whole system has been put into place to perpetuate basically forever at this point. And it's quite sad, because it really will do that. And even if the organization eventually finds out that's what's going on, they're going to think it's a playground bully, and they just need to take the bully out by using force, and the problem goes away. And they don't realize that the bully is really inconsequential at this point. So if it gets disentrenched, it's really difficult to get out at that point, particularly because this effect. So then you have to take out the target, because the target at that point becomes pretty much a casualty of war, because they're turned upon themselves. So you take the target out, but guess what? The stuff still keeps on going. And there's going to be somebody else to take that role, and there's going to be somebody else to take that role, because there's lots of opportunists in the world who are going to see that as an opportunity that needs to be filled in the organization for most likely legitimate reasons, maybe not, but most likely legitimate, and they're going to fill that role not realizing they're really filling a bully role. All sorts of weird, convoluted things start happening at this point, but the organization doesn't take itself out, of course. The situation may be changed. They may actually, completely change their business model. You may move. You may, change senior management, whatever it might be, which are all subsets of this. But that's really not going to change it. So the organization goes out of business, or it collapses, or implodes upon itself, and that'll take care of it. Okay, so I have to assume our goal is not to have this. I have to assume that we still want to have an organization, that the target is just a victim in this, and is still a viable option. I would like to reduce the bully to I don't care at that level, because again, if we focus on the bully, we've re-enabled the bully to start this whole process of playground bullying, escalates to serial bullying, escalates to organizational bullying. The most important thing is to prevent a problem. But systems thinkers really are not about problem solving, but problem prevention. And there's always going to be bullies. So what's more important is to prevent it. And that is to have the organization and the situation, and most importantly, our systems thinking skills, our problem solving techniques, our root cause analysis, all of those techniques have been learned and become part of our culture. That this stuff is subtle and small and seemingly inconsequential, but those tipping points are really the only opportunity you have to head this stuff off. If we're going through a root cause and we're saying this leads to this, which leads to some behavior which seems, like the root cause, if the behavior is something small, like the person yelled at somebody else, we'll probably get through that okay. It's when the behavior is really irrational, the person is completely out of character, is that we're not going to get through it because it's so far out of bounds. Now think about that. That doesn't make sense. If it's so irrational and so out of bounds for this person, then something is going on. There's got to be something else that we're not seeing that's influencing this behavior. They can't nip it in the bud. It's not a bad day. There's something going on that we, as a system, the organization and those people around that person, need to do something. Because there's something going on that this person can't control. If we don't believe that, then the person must be bad. I think you have to take it to that extreme. Because if you don't look at it that way, we're going to rationalize away this dynamic and everybody loses. That's a shame if no one's going to lend a hand to help them, because it's just going to get worse and it's going to become a self-fulfilling prophecy until the person does go postal. Or if this person is deceptive and is building Trojan horses and is doing evil things, then we need to treat it like a legal case and take it out. To have this become a roadblock, more so based on how irrational the behavior is, and at the same time still say that we believe that this person is rational and good. Can't have it both ways. I think an interesting example of this, for whatever you think of Waco and David Koresh and so on, if you listen to the transcripts, this is not from the news, this is actually from the transcripts. Now he's in this encampment. These are my great pictures again. He's in there, and there's this whole regime out here with a stand down going on. They had a strategy of driving him out to negotiate by driving him crazy. And the way they did that is they hired industrial psychologists to come in and find the 10 things that would drive him out of the building. I can't remember all 10 of them, but one of them was to have this large PA system out here, and they play like at 130 dB, which is like the level of a 747 taking off on the runway. They found the one music that was completely just would drive him nuts, and they played it at 130 dB around the clock. They played the sound of animals being slaughtered interchangeably with that music. They had 10 things that psychologically would push him to the limit. At some point, he wanted to come out and negotiate, and he was using his phone to call 911, and the 911 people were unable to talk to the people out here because their communication link was down. And he just wanted to come out peacefully and talk. At least that's what he was saying, if you listen to the transcripts. He then called 911 and got more and more agitated, but he also had this blaring outside, so he was talking rather loud, and wanted to know if there was a way that he could get patched through or could call someone's cell phone out here so he could not be shot at. Nobody had a cell phone. The two-way radio communication link with law enforcement back to 911 was down. There was no way for him to communicate. He couldn't call them. He couldn't call through 911. Nobody could get through. It was an encampment. The whole thing was entrenched. Nobody could get through. It was a standoff that had no solution. The only way he could do is to come out. And the only way he can get their attention is to do something very dramatic, because you can't have a conversation with 130 dBs worth of animal slaughter going on outside. After so many days of this, he was irrational and out of control. Well, it seems to me that they had a very successful campaign. They acted crazy, therefore the only response they could have is to shoot. Because he should have just come out and talked. He should not have come out and acted crazy. And therefore, this aggression was justified. Does anybody see the problem with this? In an organization that has a wicked problem, that sense of humor or that irony doesn't exist in the context of what's going on, so that technique doesn't work. And it's unfortunate, because I think humor and irony are very, very powerful techniques for dealing with very serious organizational and human problems, because it takes us out of context, takes us out of the picture, out of box thinking, and does it quickly, and it does it in a means that allows people to save face and move forward. Okay, just a little bit more on this labeling and kind of the absurdity of these premises, just to make sure that we're really driving these points home. Again, the stuff gets rooted with the culture or with the organization being taught that a behavior can be a root cause, and we're really all pretty gullible to that, because it seems reasonable. It seems like someone did this and was behaving oddly, and therefore that is the end of the root cause analysis. But we're taught that really isn't a true statement. That's something that doesn't really even make logical sense. I just don't know that most people sit back and think about it, and therefore it just doesn't get talked about, and we think that those things are true because we've been using those types of techniques and those premises all of our lives. And there's lots of that stuff in systems thinking that when you think about it, some premises and things that we built our life on are just really ridiculous. Let's take another one, and that is that a process or a procedure, a written procedure, is an endpoint and can be a root cause. That is also an absurd premise to say that someone didn't follow a process or a procedure and therefore that is what the problem is. And that is the root cause of that problem, It sounds good, but it doesn't make sense. It makes no more sense than the one I just described, where the behavior becomes a cause based on how irrational it is. That is also, like I say, very, very strange. But if we look at this procedure thing, first of all, we're saying the person didn't follow the procedure, so we've already got a person involved. So we have a person, and then we have a document out here that's the procedure. And if we're going to stop the root cause analysis, we go through one thing led to another, and the conclusion is that this person didn't follow this procedure. If that's our conclusion, first of all, as systems thinkers, we've got to take the person out of the equation. Because I don't fundamentally believe that this person got up in the morning and said, I am about to use this procedure to be sinister, evil, and do bad things. I just don't believe that. If that's the case, then let's put the focus on that person and call law enforcement. I believe that they had good intentions and something went wrong. Okay? But if we have nothing else in the page right now, what else could have gone wrong? Well, it would probably be the procedure. Therefore, the procedure is the root cause. Okay? So if we were to take this to the next level, we say our cause of the problem way back here is the procedure. Now, how do we do solutions? Because remember, we're not about doing blame. To stop here is a blame game. That doesn't help anybody. There's no point in doing this if it's to find a root cause for purposes of assigning blame. Some people will think that finding the root cause is the solution, but the only way you can say it is a solution is by bringing the person back in and saying we have to do something about it, which means then that they are implying we need to discipline this person to follow the procedure. I don't believe the person is to blame. There's a problem with the procedure. The only way we're going to make this better is by not hitting the person over the head, not blaming them, is to ask the person or to find out what the circumstances are, the environment, what the particulars are that caused this to happen, whatever it was back here, and then look for a solution. In other words, work with the person to prevent it from happening again. That's what this is really about. It's about people. So do you understand the irony when I say we have to take the people out of the equation to truly help the people? Because by stopping here, we are saying the procedure is good, the person didn't follow it, therefore the person's to blame, but we've done nothing other than whack the person over the head and told them to do better. Something else happened that caused it to not work. And the solution is to help the person not have that happen again. And if you have nothing else in the equation, here's the absurdity of this, the procedure is defective. So someone who says that we believe in a worldview, we believe in systems thinking, but concludes that someone didn't follow a procedure, the only logical thing that that can imply is that the solution is to fix the procedure because it's defective. And that's the exact opposite of what they'll tell you. They'll tell you the procedure is good, they just need to have better compliance, and that's the solution. And that makes absolutely no sense. Now, let's take it one more level. How do you disarm this when this starts happening? Because conventional thinking is going to just pass right over this. If someone says a person didn't follow the procedure, that's the root cause. The solution is to whap them over the head and get them to follow the procedure. It sounds so plausible that we'll just railroad right through that. How do you disarm this? Well, I think you need to get back to the premise where we started this whole thing of good versus evil. You need to elevate this and really say that, okay, if the person is the blame here, then let's say that we're blaming the person and we're going to say the procedure is not to blame. And then take it to the next level and say, why did they do that? Do the root cause analysis on the person. Are they bad? Are they trying to undermine the organization? What are they doing? And I think you need to follow that path and get whoever's driving this to stop at this level and get them to say what's going on with that person, identify it. And if they're not, then this is smoke and mirrors. Okay, so they put their money where their mouth is. If this person is doing something all on their own, out of context, if the procedure is good, the environment's good, circumstances were good, it's just the person, then let's nail the person for what they did. I would hope that that would stop like within a minute or two, and people would see how absurd it is, because it's a witch hunt at that point. If we're in a wicked environment, we got to be really careful, because the witch hunt will ensue. And you can't do that, so you're pretty much stuck with believing this premise that a procedure not being followed is a root cause, and in itself is probably not the end of the world, but you can't solve that without solving the broader wicked problem, because like I say, the witch hunt will go on, because the goal of something that's deceptive is to prevent problem solving, period. It doesn't matter how. And then likewise, we can say if it's not the person, then it has to be the procedure. And that, I think, also will turn into this ridiculous conversation that, does that mean we have to like have it spelled out to every footstep the person takes, and we have to have like a 40-page document when maybe 2 sentences would do? Yeah, I mean, that's the premise of bureaucracy. We have to assume then that this person's an idiot, but we don't say that, because we're going to say the procedure just needs to be improved, so we're going to have like a 40-page document. But what somebody should say is, what, are we implying this person is an idiot and can't think that the 1 or 2 sentences, the reason they didn't follow it is because something else was going on, and they don't really need to have 40 pages of explanation? If we don't say those things that are kind of mean-spirited to illustrate the mean-spiritedness of what is being implied by this type of thinking, then it really does become mean-spirited. So that's why I take this stuff so seriously, because these things are relatively innocuous on the surface level. This stuff does have big implications. Now, the ray of hope in all this is, when we're back here doing root cause analysis, we wouldn't have started with 2 things, a person and a procedure. We would have perhaps had a role, but we would have other things in here as well. We would have the methods, the way we do things, which is kind of this procedure. We would have the equipment that they're using, the way that we assess, the way we measure how it's being done. We would look at the environment in general. We would look at the circumstances, all these kinds of things. And then we would say, now, where are there gaps between what happened and what we thought should happen, and how can we help with all of this on the table? And then we would whittle this down to where the gap really exists, and where we have the best potential for making a change, and both those are important. Is another scenario that we can, like a plan B here in the procedure, that you can enact so that we don't have to get into a situation that becomes a trap. And that is a great way of doing this, because now we're helping the person, and we're making the overall system more balanced, more harmonious, and it's a win-win, and all it really took is just some a better approximation or a tweak to a procedure to make that happen. And I think that then becomes a reinforcing loop in a positive way, because now when something like this happens in the future, we're going to be more prone to solve problems and make things better than to be combative about it. And we'll even be willing to, I would hope, have smaller problems rise up and get solved. And that's kind of what this whole continuous improvement and the whole Japanese technique about kaizans and so on, where you take small things and you can keep improving to where you really do have big effects, because you're not just looking for giant problems. You've really started whittling away at even the smaller ones, which cumulatively have a significant effect in an improvement of the quality of life. Now let's go back to my example here of Waco and David Koresh, and talk just a little bit about the fallacy of this labeling. And I won't use the word crazy, because I think that's the term people like to use. If we're trying to find a solution and not just a cause and something to blame, and in this case what they wanted is for him to not just come out, but to release the people out of this compound. So they wanted something from him. Let's just assume that fundamentally he is crazy. How does that help? How does labeling crazy lead to a solution? That he'd be incapable of doing what they're asking him to do. So then why are they asking him to do it? So that's a crazy premise as well. It's like saying you are completely incapable of everything to do it, now deliver what I want, otherwise you're completely incapable of doing it. So let's not jump to conclusions with something that seems plausible but is really just pure conjecture. But you're preventing yourself from seeing potential solutions by limiting the scope, or by jumping to conclusions, or by labeling, or having false premises. You really harm your own problem-solving destination, which is to find solutions with a plural. There are several really good case studies on what I'm talking about. And one of them is the Texas A&M bonfire they had for years and years and years and years. And it's a fascinating study because the conclusion seemed completely lame, where it was like everybody's to blame, but nobody's to blame, I think was the ultimate conclusion. But if you read the paper that came out of that conclusion, several, a couple dozen pages, it was absolutely brilliant in terms of systems analysis, saying that yes, that's what it comes down to. If you take the people out of the equation, there's nobody to blame. We've got to stop blaming. But if we bring the roles and the circumstances and the interactions in of multiple generations and take it all and look at it together as a tapestry, it's inevitable what happened. And this is this giant bonfire that collapsed and killed several students and so on. If you look at it from a systems dynamics standpoint on those circumstances, it's like this could have been seen decades coming. I don't know how else it could have concluded otherwise. It was so obvious. But if you look at it strictly from a people tunnel vision, not over time or interaction of people and procedures and traditions and all those kinds of things, then the conclusion was, before the paper came out, was that it was alcohol was to blame because a bunch of students were drunk. And not only did that not solve the problem or be helpful, it turned out to be patently false because the evidence simply did not have any indication whatsoever that that was the case. It was pure conjecture that if you have a bunch of college students on a Saturday night building a bonfire, they just must be drunk. And it simply wasn't true. So that was a very huge disservice that they had that type of initial conclusion just because of a mob mentality assumption, when the real conclusion was as profound as nobody's to blame and everybody's to blame. And it'll always be a combination of factors that are the root cause. So a root cause is not a singular thing, it is a singular endpoint, but it's almost always a combination of things that together caused